natural spikegeist of each nation in a variety of idiosyncrasies, manifesting collective traumas of tragedies inflicted upon the populace by harsh conditions, treacherous terrain, a cruel climate, or by brutal invaders from beyond. In Norway, nightmares lurk beneath the ice. Fear is frozen in demonic effigy, dredged from the depths of subconscious angst, derived from darkest folklore. Most folks flee the terrors pursuing their delicate psyches. But there are some who wonder what happens when monsters thaw. Explorers of the abyss, curious as to what manner of beast haunts our thoughts and chills erratic beat of our quaking hearts, who ask if we can truly say of horrors past, never again. Welcome, one and all, to Outstriders podcast. I'm the ghostest with the mostest. See my phantom limbs? I'm partially intangible. Together here today with my other hostess, Nikolai the Horror Guy. Right, mate?
Yeah, I'm one.
Yeah. We're here to talk about the inhuman condition, particularly pertaining to the fairy tale cuddly kingdom of Norway, where nothing much has happened, they say, since Operation Weserübung, where the Nazis came over here, employing us all, building up our infrastructure, building out U-boat bases and bunkers still in use to protect our coastlines, organising agriculture, connecting our fjords. What did they ever do for us? Bastards! Never again. Where nothing much has happened, they say, because all the baddest Vikings moved down to England and became soccer hooligans, won us an empire. Where nothing much happened, or did it? Was it? Is it? Well, here today at ADHD University, don't get distracted, what? We're going to focus in on the inhuman horrid story of Norway as it is, because it's weird and it's exotic and because we got loads of oil money, so we can afford the equipment to do it. And may I give a warm welcome to our guest. Yes, Mum, we got another one. Mr. Kai Olssen. And I'm sorry for assuming your gender, sir/madam.
That's okay.
That's okay. Thanks, mate. And could you give us a brief background backdrop?
Yes, my name is Kai Olssen. I'm a curator at Forstede Film Salon, a monthly evening of cult cinema at Cinemateket here in Oslo. I'm also curator for Ravenheart International Film Festival, the only film festival in Oslo for fantastic cinema such as horror, sci-fi and fantasy. Great to be here.
And so, you've been doing some research, haven't you, mate?
Yeah, Kai has been doing a lot of different stuff, and I'm very, very curious to hear. Well, first of all, I'd like to know why you became so interested in these genres. Of course, we are focusing a lot on horror, which I also know is very close to your heart. So, why and when?
I think this must have been back in my right before I was a teenager. I got firstly interested in the fantastic through sci-fi. I was a sci-fi reader, then over to fantasy. Discovered fantasy through D&D, like many other kids of my generation, and went in there from Lord of the Rings into discovering H.P. Lovecraft when I was 14, sorry about that. And Lovecraft sparked my interest into the macabre and horrifying. This was a very interesting time to come in this, because this was back when horror came into its right here in Norway, first as an underground phenomenon, and then over to what it is now, which is starting to become more acceptable here.
Almost a mainstream thing now.
Yes, almost mainstream thing now. Now they give horror movies about 6 million Norwegian crowns to be in production budgets, as you would see in The Ugly Stepsister, the most recent horror film to come out now by director Emilie Blikkfeldt, which works in a way. It's a body horror take on the tale of Cinderella.
From the point of view of one of the stepsisters.
Of the ugly stepsister.
Yeah, so that's an amazing way. I'd like to go a little bit back to the roots, because you mentioned something that I don't know if our viewers are very much aware of, but you said there was this particular time where the interest in horror started to grow in Norway.
Yes.
And I think this also coincides with the inception of in very many respects, a very Norwegian genre of music. And there's a parallel development here.
There is, first of all,
that wouldn't be a horror, would it? No.
No. Well, no, that's
not.
another kind of horror.
It is
definitely another kind of horror, but they're kind of intertwined into the same zeitgeist. I believe that after punk, they established a DIY culture in Norway. Also, you had the advances in technology, which actually home recording cameras, VCR came out. So before that, there wasn't really much of a horror culture in Norway. Horror in itself is not that old, even if we can take parallels to the old fairy tales and the old sagas, which can be quite gruesome and quite horrifying. The guy who actually started horror in Norway is the author André Bjerke, or through his pseudonym Bernhard Borge. He wrote in the end of the 40s the horror novel, the mid-40s, the horror novel Lake of the Dead, followed by Døde menn går I land, which I don't think Lake of the Dead has been translated into English. I'm unsure about Døde menn går I land. It means dead men come ashore. Yeah.
I think Iceland made a similar type. Maybe they stole the idea. There was an Icelandic movie.
But Iceland was a bit before Norway when it came to horror. They even rewrote Dracula and set it in Iceland back in the 20s.
They were actually earlier than Norway. It's very interesting when you mention André Bjerke, who also was himself a very, very prolific translator and a poet, and then he had to use a pseudonym when he wrote Lake of the Dead, which is a sort of crime story with some supernatural and horror elements. Yes.
I would say that Døde menn går I land is more a pure horror novel than Lake of the Dead. Lake of the Dead at least has a opening that this might have a rational explanation, so it's more into a gothic theme. While in Døde menn går I land, it's more clear that this probably has a supernatural explanation.
And it's also rooted in a kind of folk horror setting, which is very very unique, I think, also in that time.
Also, Lake of the Dead was adapted into a movie in the late 50s, which is now considered a Norwegian horror classic, the first Norwegian horror film. But it's also, at least here in the United States, is now renowned as a proto-folk horror film, and was also part of the Severin Films, very excellent physical media publisher, who had it as part of their folk horror box, All the Haunts Be Ours, which I highly recommend that you seek out.
I'm sure we'll have many recommendations coming from you in that, So it's funny because you see the rational side of the Scandinavian Norwegian psyche is very much we're searching for explanations of things. But as soon as you delve into the folklore of Norway with trolls and huldras and a whole bunch of other stuff, then of course it's very detached from the rational. And so I wonder where. So I guess Andre Bjerke, maybe he was someone who actually united some of these themes.
In a way, yeah. A lot of his themes is actually, at least in Lake of the Dead, goes into the rational contra the irrational, the natural versus the supernatural, because there is this group of friends where somebody believes in the tale of the ghost haunting the lake, while others try to find a very... they go very serious into giving this a rational explanation.
Yeah.
And one of them also almost has the role of a debunker, so he's more like a proto James Randi.
Yep.
Actually, yeah.
So that's
so that's a very funny part.
Spoilers.
That's a very amusing part of the story. To look at it as a kind of precursor for those kinds of things as well.
Yep.
It's very interesting. When you mention you mentioned the advent of cheaper recording equipment, and we were of course talking about video recorders, but also recording equipment for music.
Yeah,
sort of arrives at the same time, and what arrives then is, as we talked a bit about before we started this episode, there's a development of a specific genre in music, black metal, and then you have the development of the cult horror films at about the same time.
Yeah. This was very, at least for Norwegian horror, it was very centered around two fanzines. The most important was Utgård, that was published by a guy called Jon Christian Møller, who unfortunately died last year. But he then made Norway's first underground horror feature, Oslo Terror. That you could buy to the mail order pages of Utgård. Utgård was also a place where you had people who became journalists, like J.R. Brun, who has become a very prolific Norwegian journalist, especially into topics that are a bit weird, that are a bit on the side of mainstream and everything, and he started his career there. Also, they had illustrations and comic books by Sverre Helmer Christensen, which is kind of the Norway and Denmark's answer to the infamous American illustrator and comic book artist Mike Diana.
Yes. It could be noted because graphic novels or comics even were a huge thing in Norway as well around that same period.
Well, that was about when the Norwegian comic book scene also came into its full right.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's a lot of this pop cultural things that are developing at the same time from the mid to late 80s. Comic books got a big break to a Norwegian magazine called Python, which for the British audience, it's kind of like the Norwegian answer to Viz Comics.
It's Viz in a way, isn't it?
Yep.
So I suppose you could translate Python as yuck.
Yeah, yuck.
Yeah, so yuck.
So
comics.
the yuck factor was quite high, and also it was Python was also sort of a practice ground for many artists and illustrators, which who later actually were very prolific.
Yeah, Elise Myhre started there, who made Nemi. Yeah. And also Frode Øverli, which in Norway is basically the biggest comic book artist right now with Pondus.
Yeah.
He is, which is sort of a very, very sort of 100% Norwegian humor.
I went to school with him, by the way, and we had an extracurricular lesson, drawing, and so he was a great illustrator already then. So we all figured he'd make something out of it.
Well, he did.
Yeah, he really did. And the Nemi one, I mean, that's my brother who lives in Brighton. That's his favourite comic strip as well, and she's also a very gothic. She's the ultimate goth chick.
Yeah,
kind of
I mean,
character.
she used to be a part of the Gotham Knights crew. She was working at So What, which was kind of the big alternative club in Oslo. So she was bartending there.
Yeah.
So,
And this is also where sort of you have these sort of points of convergence in Norway around, you have venues like So What in Oslo, you had Garage and Hulen in Bergen, other places where you had sort of the subculture of various genres meeting up and getting to know each other.
it was basically, there was this access where they met each other. Like I mentioned in Bergen, you had Hulen, but here in Norway, you had here in Oslo. Sorry,
Oslo is Norway.
Oslo is Norway,
We
yeah.
used to be the capital.
But then you had So What, but you also had, especially the concert scenes like Sentrum Scene and Rockefeller, that they used to have these horror nights where they would screen horror movies. And in one location, there was this film club called Himmel og Helvete that got
Was
rated
that,
Himmel og Helvete.
Oh, so Heaven and Hell.
Heaven and Hell,
yeah.
which is also the name of one of Norway's worst movies ever, which is a great... it's an anti-drug film. It's kind of Norway's Reefer Madness, and something went completely wrong because in the beginning of the 90s, if you went to a screening, you smelled pots.
Of course, for some weird reason.
So for some weird reason, Himmel og Helvete, Heaven and Hell, became a recruitment film for drug use and not a recruitment film against it.
I didn't know what a reefer was until Reefer Madness.
No,
So
the best
there you
way to
go.
advertise for drugs is to tell people not to do it.
It is indeed.
The best way to do that is by making movies that grossly exaggerate what
the
what's
danger of
going
it.
on.
Yeah, well, yes, I mean the excitement around things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Getting back to the excitement around things and that with this cross-referential cultural collaboration that came about specifically in the 90s and upwards or the 80s even, how much of this was based on foreign influence as opposed to Norwegian sort of folkloric influence, and the fact that it gets pretty dark here in winter. My nunchucks.
Yeah, that was the nunchucks
The
again.
house spook. Yeah.
When it came to Norwegian horror, they were more. I think they were more. The Norwegian horror underground scene at the time were inspired by American horror, especially the Friday the 13th films,
The slasher movies.
slasher movies, especially. Yeah. So they were very connected into that. So that was something they took inspiration from, and it's quite easy to see in hindsight because a lot of this is we have a lot of woods and
we do. There's a prime location.
Yeah. And most of the Friday the 13th films takes place in woods.
It does indeed, but next to large bodies of water.
Yeah.
So we got loads of dark lakes that look like they go on forever.
So I think that's why actually Friday the 13th kind of latched on into Norway, because that was basically the biggest foreign horror franchise.
Yeah. Back into the backwoods. Yeah.
I'm a bit curious about I know that the main inspiration can lie to a great extent in the location, but I think that maybe also, and you'll just have to, just correct me if I'm wrong, but up until the late 1980s, Norwegian censorship was very, very strict.
It was very strict.
So I'm thinking this is kind of also an act of transgression. This is counterculture. So it's like you have the punk scene growing in Norway in the 1970s and 1980s, and then suddenly there's an explosion of both black metal and horror.
Yeah.
Transgressing some Puritan ideals in Norway of what's correct.
Yeah, the Puritan ideals in Norway, and many, especially many in foreign countries, many abroad outside of Norway, thought that it was Norwegian black metal was due to the fact that Norway was a very conservative Christian country, which we weren't.
No.
No. Because a lot of these, but what you can call Norwegian Puritanism was kind of all over the place. It was in conservative scenes, it was in the Christian scene, of course, but it was also on the left side of politics. Was very Puritan. You weren't supposed to watch these movies. You weren't supposed, because that was harmful for you. It was harmful for society. So when you've been refused that, of course, the backlash will be more severe.
And that does explain why, despite the secular nature of Norwegian society, that there was such a huge need for this kind of rebellion. So it was weirdly a rebellion against what we term the nanny state, that cared a little bit too much. Kind of, I remember when skateboards were banned.
Skateboards were away until 1989.
I remember the skateboard was banned. Kids who had skateboards, if they bought in Sweden, police would stop them and then confiscate skateboards. And then probably tell the child protective services that their parents weren't taking care of them because they let them skate. It was completely absurd.
And they were so well organized. They find out where you live anyway. So,
it's very interesting also when we're talking about this as a sort of Norwegian phenomenon with the rebellion against these sort of puritanical laws, that you're talking about that across the entire political spectrum, people who disagreed on so many different things, there was a consensus about that, some stuff was just morally reprehensible.
Beyond the pale.
Beyond the pale, And especially when we were talking about music or art or film that has some kind of transgressive nature, which is kind of, delves into the darker things or is sort of visceral and gory.
It was kind of interesting because as a thing I noticed is that most of this, both black metal and Norwegian horror fandom, didn't start in the city centers. It started in the suburbs. It started out in the boondocks.
Well, that's where the black metalers came from. They were outside of the centre of town, while us punks were busy occupying houses and that and trying to run crappy cafes. They were out in the backwoods. Backwards into the backwoods, as it were. And really, but I guess they were a bit closer to the location, and the feel when you walk through a Norwegian wood, and some places there's no one around for miles. You can't get a signal on your mobile phone. Anything could happen. So it is that kind of closeness to the primeval, almost the primordial in nature that perhaps has influenced Norwegian expression and culture in a lot of transgressive ways.
Well, at least you can't deny its effect on the almost recently new traditions of the macabre and the grotesque in Norwegian culture, especially in Norwegian subculture. You can't underestimate the power of nature there. It's very, very clearly visible both in black metal but also in Norwegian horror movies that so many of them take place in woods.
And do you think that is an aspect of that, the unknown unknowns with the cosmic horror element? Because, my son as well, one of the first things he read in English, and he was about the age you mentioned, just puberty can be a difficult time. But I think Lovecraft helped him guide his way through the pimply period.
Just read The Outsider. It's I don't think that Lovecraft actually thought about it consciously, but maybe subconsciously, because it's kind of like a metaphor. You can interpret it as a metaphor on puberty.
And
it is pure body horror. Really, just sort of the entire story is, just turning out to become the object yourself. Which is very, very fascinating.
And the harshness of nature as well in Norway, because it's they say it's not how cold it is; it's how you what clothes you wear. The facing nature and blizzards and minus temperatures. As soon as you walk out of the centre of the towns, which are pretty safe, then I guess that kind of the unknown factors about nature. And we do have wolves in Norway. We got a bunch of bears and that, and what wolverines and
we're
the missing lynx.
We're more
somewhere out there.
harmful for those animals than they are for us.
We are indeed, yeah.
When it comes to the power of nature, I remember, because I'm actually from Norway, how growing up when I was a kid, you would hear from the old-timers about everybody had died at sea, especially fishermen. And they used to croak up till, there was a lot of them actually croaked up till the mid-1950s when they actually got more safer trawlers and everything.
Oh my God,
But there were still people dying.
Yes, I mean, the communities I mean, I was at a graveyard in Sotra, an island just outside of Bergen, and it's like all the graves I glanced at or went through, they were of young men who died at sea. So seamen was all over the place, and it was
especially fishermen.
Yes, but these were communities that were solely dependent on fishing and that, and the North Sea is a harsh mistress.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also the Atlantic, the North Sea, and I mean, before you had proper meteorological service, I mean, a storm could basically destroy a community.
Yes.
You would have no bread. You would have no breadwinners left if a storm took all the people there. So you used to have these small isolated communities up in Northern Norway where it was just widows and small children.
Yeah.
Because the men had died in some sort of storm.
Oh, you shouldn't have put them all on the same trawler.
No, but I mean, they had different trawls and different ships, but when a big storm comes...
Exactly, yeah.
You don't have a chance.
So the elements, facing the elements, and that, so it's this, I guess, in a way, it's possible to say that despite the foreign influences of music, then the Norway's taken stuff, like the Japanese, and made it better. Or different, at least.
Or different, at least its own.
Yeah,
at least
it's own, They've claimed ownership towards it.
Element of nature is actually what separates Norwegian horror from, for instance, Swedish and Danish horror. Danes have a lot around the institutions in society. Like in Breeder, you have about the cosmetic industry. In the Kingdom, you have about healthcare. In Nightwatch, you have about the police.
Yes.
So they have more about the institutions. We have more about nature. And Sweden is very into the cosmic horror elements and also the urban elements of Sweden. I mean, how many Swedish horror films that take place in the suburbs?
Yes, absolutely. Like for example, Left the Right One In, for example.
Yeah, of course. That was, one of the things that Stephen King's got too much credit for is suburbanizing the horror genre by making things seem much closer to
home.
So the Swedes are Stephen King.
But also
the
where
McDonald's
Lovecraft,
of horror.
But also where Lovecraft, they had a big tradition of Lovecraft there.
That is the added element. They're a bit more
of
esoteric than us bumpkins over here, I guess. But
in a way, but again, Sweden horror movies also have the erotic aspects.
They do indeed. They do indeed. Yeah, they're a bit more advanced there than us as well. So what about Finnish horror?
Finnish horror, they have always had kind of a folklore tradition because they actually made one of the first folklore movies, The White Reindeer. But they kind of also have Finnish horror always, the hatchling, they seem to be centered around some animal or some creature. You have that in The White Reindeer, you also have it in the hatchling.
Oh, what a great name for it. Oh, the hatchling.
And also there is a certain element of brutality, but they also have a brutal history. They do.
And that brutality in Finland also seeps into more of the mainstream films as well.
Yep.
It is a very pervasive element in very much of Finnish
but also
motion picture.
But also the absurdity of when things go wrong, like you see in Kaurismäki's movies.
Absolutely.
The craziness, the absurdity of everything. I mean, they have a jackass crew that were pretty funny. I mean, Wales, Finland, and of course the States, So
and Kaurismäki can also almost be kind of portrayed as a sort of Kafkaesque, sort of filmmaker.
Yeah.
For instance, you have his adaptation of a girl with a matchstick box by Holst Andersen. He made the girl from Matchstick Factory, where there is no dialogue for the first 10 minutes. Then you see the girl working at the Matchstick Factory. She goes home after buying a lovely floral summer dress. And the first dialogue is her father, who's taking a shot of vodka, slaps her and calls her a whore.
Yeah. Yeah, well, then the tone is set.
Yeah.
The tone is set, yes.
Yeah. So the family drama element is also contextualized within the themes of brutality and the hard life, especially you could be invaded by Russia or Sweden or anybody kind of, and
but I kind of see also the dark humor. There's also a dark humor, view on the dark humor of existence itself.
Yeah. Yeah, if we get drunk enough, we can always laugh at it.
I was just thinking, there is an interesting connection here as well. If we're thinking about a couple of rather recent Norwegian films, which take place in the suburbs, actually.
Yep.
I'm thinking now about De Uskyldige, in English, The Innocents.
Yeah, The Innocents by Eskil Vogt.
Yes, which came out fairly recently. And then you have The Handling of Undead, with Håndtering av udøde, which isn't really a horror story per se, but which has some really sort of very pervasive horror elements.
Well, the interesting of Handling the Undead is that it's based on a novel by the same writer as who also wrote Let the Right One In. So it was actually set in the original novel is actually set in Stockholm, but they adapted it. They didn't get funding for it in Sweden, but they got funding to make it here in Norway. Right. So the story is adapted to Norway,
and actually works quite well.
Yeah.
The same with The Innocents as well, which I found really fascinating because it also has some fantasy elements, I think,
science fiction elements,
because it sort of comes across as scanners for kids.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the Midwich Cuckoos. The John Wyndham.
It kind of had a bit of
it has some similarities, but
Village of the Damned, sort of. It's kind of in a way it's kind of a Wyndham story, and I need to ask Eskil about that next time I meet him.
Well, it's easy to be inspired by John Wyndham in many ways. But you were saying, Nikolai, that what actually is the Innocents about? There's kids in it, right?
That's so fascinating. That's one of the things I find really fascinating with Eskil Vogt's film. And I watched it at that was at Ravenheart.
That was at Ravenheart, we had a pre-prepared screening of it.
And there was also a very good chat between Kai Olssen here and Eskil Vogt afterwards, just talking about the film and the inspiration and stuff. It's amazing to see a horror film from the point of view of the children, where the grown-ups are basically extras and window dressing.
Almost Charlie Brownish in
yes, it is, because it's almost as if they're just like
kind of like
Peanuts. They're part of this. They're part of this universe that the kids are just in, not by their own choice and just by default. But they aren't really. They are not very. They're not very important for the story, and the story is so well portrayed.
Yep.
So would you say that is a typically Norwegian horror film, or where would you put this film in which tradition would you put it in?
I would actually say it's in a way it's quite Norwegian, it's quite Oslo, but it's also not what you would call it. It has the nature elements, but it's not nature. Except that human nature, of course, there's a threat there. But again, I would say it evolves into more almost a Japanese tradition of horror. Because there is, I know that he was inspired by manga when he wrote the script and took a lot of inspiration from Japanese horror mangas.
Which a lot of spooky kids there, yeah.
Yes, and also in relation to how the kids deal with each other and how the sort of the world of the grown-ups is a bit intrusive and in the way.
Yep.
And they are living their own lives, which I found really fascinating.
Yeah, so the secret lives of children, which I think which all children actually have in a certain way.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that it takes place in one of these sort of Drabantbyer, which is kind of
suburbs.
Suburban hellscape with tall, these
Oslo favelas.
tall blocks that look like they're just taken out of the Soviet Union.
Norwegian cozy brutalism in architecture.
Cozy brutalism. I like that.
Yeah, cozy brutalism.
Yeah, cozy brutalism.
Yeah. Sort of a Stalin Potemkin village. Yeah.
Which was kind of interesting because that's one of the first places where Nikita Khrushchev went during when he visited Norway in the 60s was at Berlin.
Why doesn't that surprise me? But,
just to see the effects of the Soviet influence in Norway in the 1960s.
I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was kind of pleased visiting Berlin.
Well, I can understand why. If you want to check that out, it's B-Ö, like the O with the line over, L-E-R. So just Google that and you'll find some very interesting buildings.
Oh yeah, it was also where they had the phenomenon of Narvere, which was kind of in the 70s, Norwegian disaffected youth who was hanging around the Narvesen kiosks, which is kind of the 7-Eleven here in Norway.
Yeah.
And they were hanging around there and they were doing drugs, mostly glue and amphetamines, and wearing quite horrible clothes, and most of them became junkies.
Yeah, very interesting and very sad subculture. Yeah. Yes, of sort of the epitome of disenfranchised youth in Norway. The ones who didn't get into the punk scene or didn't get into the other sort of subcultural scenes, but more just ended up hanging around the Norwegian equivalent of 7-Eleven. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what struck me when I came here as a kiddie in the middle of puberty, as a Thatcher refugee, come over here on the boat, was the fact that there was two ways out of these Norwegian favelas, ghettos, if you want to call them that, with the brutalist culture and these impersonal blocks and that. I mean, there were no pubs. Oh, my dad was in shock. And there was only, it's like, one way out was through sports.
Yep.
And beyond sports, the cultural activities there, it was if you got a crappy guitar or you could make your nunchucks.
Yep.
So we were either hitting each other or someone in the street had a bigger music collection than anybody else. Yep. And so it was listening to music at the same time, and then getting some crappy instruments together and doing things. But that was so frowned upon. They would rather that we would hurt each other with stupid throwing stars and weapons that we made than actual being allowed to practice music and that. So
I mean, there were no, at least in Börler's case, it was also where the Norwegian neo-Nazi scene was strongest in the whole of Norway. There were neo-Nazi gangs running around there.
That also brings me to, I was thinking of some of the other films that we are going to talk about.
Yep.
But one element I did want to look in on as part of that scene of the disenfranchised youth and the nanny state, as it were, that everything apart from sports and proper culture, as they called it. It was the fact that comics were so big, and that the biggest kick we could get, apart from getting drunk on moonshine, was seeing when movies came over. It was like the Faces of Death and things, movies that were not allowed.
That created complete chaos, moral panic in Norway when video came. Like in the UK with video Nazis, we had the same phenomenon here. People who rented movies got not as bad as in the UK. They didn't get thrown to jail, but they were fined to the point where the businesses went bankrupt, and you had people all over the place, both in Christian environment, conservative environments, again, both on the left side, reporting people who rented out horror videos to the police, which is completely absurd.
Yeah,
right
there was
now.
this kind of snitch culture where and I remember it's very interesting because being a part of this subculture and this kind of outsider sort of scene.
Yep.
It was very interesting to see, just how exciting it was to find films.
Yeah.
Really poor, very bad quality, fourth
Video
generation VHS copies of films that had been it seemed like they'd been run through 3 or 4 different countries before they arrived in Norway.
More grainy than whole wheat bread.
and then watching them on these tiny televisions. No wonder that sort of people started to think that, maybe it's an idea to make something ourselves as well.
Yeah, and also what happened at the same time, they got, back in the late 80s, somebody got actually a good ID, even if it was very state ID. It was this idea that maybe if they learn more about cinema, learn more about television and production, that they wouldn't watch these films. And therefore you got the media centers that were run by the counties, especially One Video 8, which I went to back in the day. And what happened was that several of these people, like Utgård, who was my teacher, who was a former student there, he went into creating Norway's first professional slasher film called Prey.
Oh. Yeah.
So it was kind of very counterproductive because most of these were the places where black metal bands actually could get produced their music videos, and you would have punk bands, and you would have sleaze rock scene here in Norway with bands like Trash Can Darlings also producing their videos there. And of course the people running these places were completely shocked and horrified by everybody making the students who were supposed to do proper stuff was making horror and splatter movies and black metal music
and it's
videos.
amazing too. It's amazing, just the complete paradox in trying to sort of nudge people onto the right path by giving them loads of equipment and then being shocked when they actually choose the left-hand path and go all in on black metal or all in on gory films. And Cold Prey is also, one of the maybe one of the most well-known Norwegian films from that time.
It was a big success here in Norway, and to the surprise of everybody who was kind of in a horror scene, because nobody expected that it would do that well abroad, but it became kind of the latch point, the breakout point for Norwegian horror abroad.
Absolutely. Also because it actually was a very well made, technically very well made story, very well paced and all that kind of stuff. And actually, also sporting some quite good acting as well. Actually, some of the actors went on and had some very good careers after that as well.
Played in Westworld. People have played in really big movies.
Ingrid Bolse Berdal was in Westworld, right?
The original with Yul Brynner.
We're talking about the series.
Victoria Winge became kind of like a Norwegian scream queen.
Yeah, absolutely. She did. Yeah. So paradoxically, trying to get people on the straight and narrow actually led to a much more solid foundation, both for music and not least
the media
film.
The media workshops were kind of important back in the 90s because it was a low effort, you could basically go in there, you talked to the unemployment office, then they said okay, you don't have anything to do that because it was also vocational training.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's why I got thrown into there back in the day.
They should never have had a pyrotechnics course for musicians, should they? It caused a lot of churches to get destroyed. So, but instant ruined location still. But another aspect of the development of Norwegian film seems to me also the level of professionalism has been kind of impressive. A lot of stuff you see on regular TV back in the day was very theatrical, where the acting was more forced, more stage type presence than realistic.
That had a lot to do that we didn't have a proper film school in Norway before the end of the 90s when you got Norwegian Film Academy. Before that, you either had to go to the television, had to go to the production companies who made commercials, and usually most of the actors, that's why a lot of Norwegian movies from the 70s, 60s to the 80s take place during summertime. It's because that's when the actors had vacation from the theater.
Exactly, yeah.
And most of them are theater actors. So, and a lot of the people who made films had theater background back then, because that was the only way to actually.
You do see that very much in the production, especially sort of pre-1990s productions, both as far as films and TV shows are concerned. There's this very sort of stilted way of acting, because most of them went to the theatre college in Norway. Yes.
And most of them were theatre actors, and most of them didn't have the vocational training for acting against camera. You had some people, Bjørn Sundquist, who was more natural. You had
Helge Jordal.
But he also, but on Svein Anker Austdal also played in some British productions.
Yes, he did. But both Helge Jordal and Svein Anker Austdal did have a sort of theatre background.
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
they just did something different with it than some of the other actors in the same generation. Yes. I'd like to go a bit more back to what you are doing on a monthly basis and also on an annual basis, because I'd like to hear more. First of all, I'd like to hear more about Forstyrret Filmklubb.
Yes. Forstyrret Filmsalong. We can call Forstyrret Filmklubb.
Disturbed Film Salon.
Yes. Disturbed Film Salon.
As mentioned in my introduction, it's a monthly. It's a series of monthly screenings of cult films at Cinemateket here in Oslo. We screen quite a variety of different films. We have screened, what we especially have tried to do is screen a lot of Norwegian cult movies. So when we go into things like Hva med Venner, which is quite hysterical, come basically two of the most notorious directors here in Norway.
Were they the ones that did Heaven and Hell, wasn't it?
No, that was his father. That was Petter
the
Vennerød.
father.
It's generational.
Yes. So the father of Petter Vennerød made the first sort of Heaven and Hell. And then you have Sven Vam and Petter Vennerød, who made some of the most sort of notoriously horrific Norwegian films.
Yeah, but also quite unique.
Quite a cult following. Yes, absolutely unique.
And they
absolutely unique.
Yes. They were two filmmakers very interested in, first of all, anarchism. They were also very interested in theatre of the absurd, especially the writings of Dario Fo. They were also inspired by Italian cinema, Fellini, Antonioni, and Liliana Calvini, who made Night Porter. So what they did was, it's not subtle at all. Every dialogue is just punched in your face, but they were constantly fighting with critics. They even said that they were beat up critics. They were also several of the films had big problems with censorship here in Norway. Because they used something that they showed things you shouldn't show, like gore, like a real erection, real sex.
This is before Game of Thrones days.
This is before Game of Thrones. And also in Norway, hardcore pornography was banned here till 2006. So their film, several of the films got into a lot of trouble with the film censorship board here in Norway.
And I think that also, there must have been an issue of funding, because I don't think that they
got actually a lot of funding, because compared to what people actually believe now, several of their films did very, very well.
Well, I think that people sort of may have been a sort of split audience. Some people were fascinated with what they were doing and what they were trying to do at least, and others just wanted to see a train wreck.
Yeah, it was kind of split in that way, and also the critics were split in that way. But at least they were very good at selling the movies, which worked up to the point of the 90s when everything became ironic. Then they didn't. So then the careers didn't survive that.
No, because they were about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the head.
Yeah. There was no irony deficiency there, was there? No,
absolutely,
that's true.
But still at the same time, a very fascinating sort of nugget of Norwegian film history, and very unique, highly unique. I mean, you can watch 3 minutes of a Vammen Venner film, and you know it's that.
Yeah. It's but they were also one of the few experimented. They did visual stuff. It's just them and two other filmmakers. One Beredo Greve, who made which is from the Stonewood Forests, which is a film highly inspired by the writings of Margaret Murray and Carlos Castaneda.
Oh, right.
Who Carlos Castaneda also inspired, by the way, Star Wars, so there is a connection there.
Really?
And it's about a young woman who, after breaking up with her boyfriend, entered a witch's coven. It's not a horror film, but it's very psychedelic, shot on black and white. Became highly controversial in Norway, where where a communal cinema manager. Yes, every cinema in Norway was communal, was driven by the council.
Municipal.
By the municipal. In Hønefoss, he refused to screen the movie, and Beredo Greve, which was also one of the very outspoken character, said fuck this and took cinema projection equipment, screened it on the wall of the cinema, then police arrested him. But not for disturbing. It was because he didn't have a council license to screen a movie.
Oh, you can get arrested for that kind of thing.
And I think that also maybe both Beredo Greve and Vammen Venner were very much in opposition to the way films were made at that time. There was this high ideal, especially in the 1970s and 80s, because I remember this growing up.
The social realism.
The social realism.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be realistic, no fantastical elements, very natural in every respect, sort of natural lighting, everything. So anything that made it too artsy was wrong. Which is kind of also a bit weird, because you have this paradox of high culture on one side, and then the social realism. Films have to be realistic and they have to portray social issues.
Which is then you go into the third character, which was kind of breaking up on this element here in Norway, which was Edvard Skolmen. He made 2 movies. One of the most infamous of them is Junior Heads, or I ungdommens makt.
It's in the Power of Youth. It's just a direct
Power of the Youth, but they call Junior Heads in English.
Junior Heads
is the closest thing you will get to in Norway to something. For instance, you would say filmmakers like Alejandro Jodorowsky or Fernando Arrabal or Roland Topor. It's the only proper surreal made Norwegian film. Highly visual. It has crucifixion. It has scenes from real cremation. It has a scene from real live birth. It also have an alien abduction scene.
From real life, I would imagine.
Who knows?
So,
Who knows?
Exactly.
And that has been. It was 2 times declared the worst movie ever made in Norway. We screened it. And people we didn't get the reaction we expected, because there were people there. I had a friend. He hates Norwegian movies, and went up to the director and said, "This is the only good Norwegian movie I ever watched in my life."
Wow, typical contrarian. Well, as someone who's witnessed a real life birth, I can certainly vouch for the horror elements there. I thought I got Zippy the Pinhead as my offspring when he came out. So isn't that the wrong colour?
I've also witnessed a couple of childbirths in my life, and it's a harrowing experience.
It really
at
is.
the same time, a marvelous experience. So
and
but I can
marvellous,
understand
beautiful
why
film,
I can
beautiful.
understand why that would be a controversial thing in film.
Yep.
Yeah.
But back to this is sort of ties back into the cult film salon,
Yeah.
Forstyrret
yeah.
Film Salon. You have screenings once a month,
Yeah.
and which films have been featured, and which films do you plan to feature? Just give us a sort of little selection to show the scope.
According, in addition to the Norwegian cult ones, we have screened stuff like everything from The Lost Boys to Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger, by dystopian documentaries such as the Hellstrom Chronicle, to Swedish rape and revenge movies such as Thriller, Cruel Picture. We have screened a variety of different films.
And what's in store for your film salon of aficionados the next
in
couple of times?
April, we will screen The Blob from 1988.
Ooh. Oh, the remake.
The remake. The very good remake.
It's great fun.
Which was kind of interesting because it was, at the time, they always cut horror movies, but for some strange reason, this passed uncut through the censors. And another weird thing happened. It got good critique. Almost all the newspapers gave it 2 thumbs up, which was very interesting.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Normally, especially among the highbrow media, then horror is looked down upon.
Yeah.
So that it's always given less marks than
So
something.
this was kind of even. There was this critic at Arbeiderbladet, now Dagsavisen, called Harald Kolstad, which actually was renowned for being not very fond of commercial movies, who said that this was a masterpiece. It was brilliant filmmaking.
So what gelatinous method did the Blob use to squeeze through the opinions of the highbrow?
No. I mean, it is still a very well made horror movie.
Yeah.
And also they were it was before the liberalization of Norwegian film censorship that came more in the beginning of the 90s. But even then they were kind of, at least, thinking that if it's a monster, it was less chance to have it cut because then it was not realistic.
Yes,
It has some fantastical elements, I would say. I mean, it's been a long time since I've watched that version of The Blob, but I do remember that it's sort of, you'd be very hard pressed to call it realism.
Yeah,
I think that I think you're quite right about that. I think that might have played into it. I think that films like, for example, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or the Friday the 13th films, the original ones, would have a much harder time going through censorship because of the realism.
Yeah, I mean,
also the closeness to actual things that could happen.
I mean, it's not a nipple; it's just a crease in the.
I mean, even in the end of the 90s, when Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, came out on video here in Norway legally for the first time, they even had the cuts. They had cut one scene from the movie. So, and even though they had passed worse films by that time through Norwegian film censors without any issues.
Well, that was infamous, wasn't it? So,
I think maybe it also was a matter of principle. You couldn't, in a sense, back down on the onslaught that was when Texas Chainsaw Massacre first arrived.
Yeah.
I remember the controversy, and I remember people just condemning it without even having watched it. This was the most horrible thing that had ever happened.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really.
I think
everything was
to
called a
its
snuff
power.
movie at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it speaks to its power as a movie.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
very suggestive. It's kind of a movie that feels more worse than it is, even if there's only one scene that you see anything that resembling gore.
Yes, and I mean there are, considering that it's sort of renowned as one of the most horrific movies of its time, it's actually quite murder-free. There's not very much murder going on, but the whole atmosphere is so it's so sort of
Well, it's that
brutal.
analog horror, found footage vibe to it as well,
Yes,
especially the beginning,
it is.
isn't it?
And also, I think there's one more thing which my son actually said about it. There's this from the very first image. There's such an oppressive atmosphere.
Yeah.
The whole thing feels like it's hanging down over your head.
Yep.
The heat and
It's
the
like
flies.
you can see. I mean, they shot it during the heat wave. You can watch. There's a lot of you can watch a lot of heat waves in the background there because that was, which is not CGI, which is it was that hot when they shot it.
And you really get that sense. It's almost sort of physically palpable when you're sitting in the movie theater.
There's shout out to Ed Gein there that inspired Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Absolutely.
But do you think maybe it's because as a rather forested sylvan nation, Norwegians have a lot of chainsaws here. So perhaps the authorities were a bit scared that people were going to go crazy
get
with
inspired. Maybe
might have been.
Yeah. I'd like to sort of. I think we might be getting close to time here, but I would like you to tell us a little bit about, first of all, tell us a bit about the basis or the general idea for the Ravenheart Film Festival.
Well, Ravenheart, as mentioned, was a part of what was called Oslo Pride Fest. That was the first horror film festival.
Pride Fest.
Yeah, that was the first horror film festival here in Norway, even 1 year before Ramaskrik started. Ravenheart was born after we screened a short film called The Forsaken. And the two filmmakers, Aladdin and Adam, then approached me after the screening saying that they wanted to start a horror film festival. And I said, we already have Ramaskrik and already have done a horror film festival or been a part of a horror film festival. So I wanted to then expand the broadness of it by having a fantastic film festival where we screen sci-fi, fantasy, animation, and also documentaries, related documentaries, of course. So it was very much more inspired by bigger continental festivals such as Sitges in Spain, Brussels International Fantastic Film Festival in Belgium, and Fantastic Film Festival in Lund in Sweden. So it's more related into that. It's more to actually separate and put us into kind of our own little niche compared to the other fantastic film festivals here in Norway, because right now there is two horror film festivals. It's Tisvær and Ramaskrik, which I mentioned, and also Hamar is starting up a horror film festival now pretty soon. So
Fantastic film also gives so many possibilities, as you said, surrealism, horror, fantasy, science fiction, specific documentaries and so on. Do you have some teasers for people who might want to come to Norway in June, or people who already will be in Norway in June? Do you have some teasers or some...
We're still working on the program, but I can tell you that we hope to have a quite big anticipated movie as a opening feature. I would also recommend highly to watch our short film programs, because that's where that is the most interesting, where we have a lot of creative filmmakers from all around the world submitting their work to us.
And absolutely the best place to watch short films is at one of these festivals, because you get so much more. You get the accompanying discussions around the films. You get to meet people who you can speak with about these films. There's so much interesting stuff going on there.
And also we have been helping out. It's also a place where we have actually had productions happening due to this. We have had a short film. We also have been the director of Wicker Man 3 found his lead actress at last year's festival, so this is very exciting.
So come to the festival and become discovered.
Yes, absolutely.
And I've been trying to be typecast for years.
As we earlier on also touched in on The Innocents, which did it have a sort of pre-premiere at Ravenheart? Or
it did have a pre-premiere.
So this is actually also the place to find out what's going on in the foreground and in the avant-garde of fantastic films.
shadows.
And especially Norwegian ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If
So
you
it's
were
a-
going to, sorry, if you were going to recommend some films for our foreign audience members to watch to get a sort of a bit of a grasp of Norwegian horror stuff,
I would
and that,
say there are a couple of films here. You can start with the first one, Lake of the Dead. It's available in the United States. It's also available here in Norway with English subtitles. You go to platecompany.no and buy it there. I would also recommend a Norwegian underground film called Christmas Cruelty.
Christmas Cruelty.
It's the Norwegian Santa slasher where Santa is working for NAB.
yeah,
And he
the
goes around
unemployment
killing
benefits
people.
office.
So yeah,
that
benefits
sounds
office.
like no presents for you, Tiny
Yeah.
Tim. yeah.
And of course, The Innocents. If you have the possibility when you see it, also
How about a zombie? Dead Snow that did
Dead
really
Snow,
well
yeah, Dead
internationally.
Snow, yeah, that
I'm
was
waiting for the
international.
follow-up. Yellow
Troll
Snow.
Hunter.
Troll Hunter, yeah.
Troll Hunter, yeah. The Norwegian was it Gaijin or the
Kaiju, yeah,
Kaiju,
yeah, but
Kaiju,
also,
yeah.
that's Troll. Yeah, and Troll Hunter. Troll Hunter is more a found footage horror film.
Yeah.
But it also goes into Norwegian bureaucracy. Is a big part of it.
Oh,
so
that's
you will learn
the
a lot
true
about
horror.
Norwegian culture there.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
the
it's a
true
very.
horror.
It's the Troll Hunter is, I would say, one of the sort of most quintessentially Norwegian horror movies.
It's super Norwegian.
And it's just amazing, just the way they've both mixed sort of the found footage element in it, but also mixing Norwegian folklore, Norwegian bureaucracy,
Oh.
and the sort of Norwegian folk spirit.
Yep.
The
Yeah.
mentality is just so pervasive. So if you really want to find out what makes Norwegians tick, Troll Hunter is a very
Hunter
good
is
bet.
Kafkaesque and yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest sense of horror I had today was finding clothes to wear for this,
Yeah.
because you're always nicely toned
Nicely
out.
tied, yeah,
Sorry, you
that's-
mate. So it's a no underpants day. So my biggest fear is Jack the Zipper.
Yep.
So, but until then, I hope you can come back and inform us some more, and
will.
we'll be at the
Very
festival.
interesting.
Kai.
Yeah, really looking
And it's
forward to
11
the
from the
festival.
15th of June. So keep that up in everybody's calendar.
So
Yeah.
everybody, 11th to the 15th of
Of
June.
June, when it's most light outside.
Yeah.
And as far as I've heard, you will have some news come April. So
Yes.
really having our fingers crossed here and really looking forward to hearing more about what's going on there.
Thank you for looking forward
Thank
to
you
it
so
also.
much.
Well, we're going
Thank
to be there, aren't we, mate?
Oh, we are. Most
Try and keep us
absolutely.
away. Yes. So thank you again, sir.
You're more than
So,
welcome.
yes.
Thank you for being invited.
Thank you.
Yep.
Cheers.
Cheers.